I really appreciate the opportunity to tell my story here today. So I'm going to share, a lot of photos today. And there's some of you probably aren't going to like everything I say, but maybe at least you'll like my pictures. So anyway, I'll start by, and also I guess I'd make the note that all the photos are pictures of unless noted otherwise, they're of my certified organic crops and pastures and grain crops. But anyway, I'll give you just a little bit more history. I grew up on a family farm, started working at a very young age, 5 or 6 years old. When I was 10 years old, I got my first cow, started a cow herd. When I was in high school, I bought my first quarter section of pasture at $227 an acre, and should have bought a lot more of it, but I didn't have a lot of money laying around when I was 16 or 17 years old. But anyway, so I eventually went away to college, got a bachelor's degree in animal science, and then worked for the USDA for a while, and ended up going back to graduate school and got a master's degree in exercise physiology. I really had two passions in life, and I made separate careers, although there's a lot of relevancy, but two different careers to follow my passions. So after I finished graduate school, I got the job as the head strength coach at the University of Massachusetts. At that time, I was the youngest head strength coach in Division I college athletics. Did that for a while, but really, I guess I always wanted to be a farmer when I grew up. So in 1993, I moved back to Nebraska, and my father was getting elderly, and I ended up taking over the family farm. And I, put on the blinders and jumped on the treadmill and farmed conventionally for 6, 7, or 8 years, and got very disillusioned with that. I realized I was a chemically addicted farmer, and nothing more than a serf on the land, beholden to all the large ag conglomerates that were promised that they were going to make me profitable and more productive and more efficient, and none of that was true. So in about the year of 2002, I abruptly kicked all the Monsantans to the curb and stopped using chemicals, fertilizers, any kind of synthetics on all 2,800 acres that I managed and co-owned with my family. So that's kind of the short version of my story. So next slide, Angela. So when we talk about land management and conservation, I think I guess when I look at it, I kind of have to ask myself, what really is my job title? And I consider myself a land manager first, with who's conservation minded. People call me a farmer, a rancher, and that fits too. But I'm really a land manager, and I have a diversified operation with crops and livestock. And you can see in the photos there some of those examples of high stock density grazing and organic soybeans and organic corn. And go to the next slide. So there's a lot of different approaches to land management and conservation. I think you need to ask yourself, how are you going to approach this, and how can we get these kind of results here? The photos there shows a clump of soil there in a cover crop field of oats and peas, lots of organic matter, lots of root mass there. And that's kind of what we're looking for. We're building organic matter and fertility with biomass. And it's pretty common for me to just dig up a little small spadeful of dirt and count anywhere from 6 or 8 to sometimes 10 or 12 earthworms. There was 9 in that particular example. You can't see them all because some of them were on the other side, but and it didn't used to be that way when I farmed conventionally. My soil organic matter when I was farming conventionally was around 1.5%, and I was using this Haney soil test scores, and they were in the single digits and low teens. And now all of my crop fields have soil organic matter in the 3.5 to 6.5% range, and my Haney soil health scores are all in the mid to high 20s and even into the low 30s, which is pretty much off the scale. So we've been able to really increase soil health, but at the same time increase our efficiency and, most importantly, profitability, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Next. So it's kind of an integrated approach to a lot of things, including pest management, our holistic approach, and just some photos, examples there. I've seen probably more praying mantis and insects in the last few years than I've seen in the rest of my lifetime combined. Lots and lots of dragonflies, damselflies, and pretty much every cow pie on the place. It looks like somebody shot it with a shotgun. All those dung beetles in there working on the manure. And we've got lots and lots of buffer strips. And there's an example in the upper right there of milkweed and lots of monarch butterflies. And we didn't plant that. But the thing is, when you're doing regenerative practice and holistic management, you're just not out there trying to kill everything. So that thrives because we don't spray, we don't with herbicides. We're not trying to kill stuff like that. We want it around. Next. Honeybees on the farm. I'm not a beekeeper, but I have a small mom and pop operation that brings bees to the farm, and that's and we have a lot of native wild pollinators as well. But the honey from those areas and from all the sweet clover is the best honey ever. Next. And we've got this is just a very, very small sample of wildlife diversity that we have. And I see prairie chickens almost every day. And we also have sharp-tailed grouse, wild turkeys, quail. And I see bald eagles usually 2 or 3 times a week this time of year. We've got quite a bit of aquatic life because I got some farm ponds. And then Clear Creek runs through my farm. And that's a live stream, year-round stream with a lot of aquatic life there. And I really enjoy the wildlife and all the diversity. Next. One of my favorite things is all the wildflowers. I mean, and there's, 10 times more than what I have in this photo. But, these are some of my favorites, and particularly the yellow flowers. That's prickly pear cactus, and those are some of the most beautiful flowers in our pasture. And I really enjoy the different times of the year, the different colors, depending on the season and out in the pasture. We estimate we probably have 150 to 200 species of plants in our native pastures and around the creeks and the borders and stuff. And most of those are native, the majority, but not all of them. But that includes trees and woody plants and native legumes and grasses and forbs and, all kinds of different plants. And next. Yeah, there's some examples. Wild plums and then chokecherries down in the bottom right, and Pennsylvania smartweed up there in the upper left, and down in the bottom left, that's Jerusalem artichoke. A lot of that. Slicer milk vetch. Of course, our state flower is the goldenrod there. But probably one of my favorite plants is that in the middle bottom, and that's a lead plant, and that's a native legume in the pea family. And it's also known as buffalo bellows or prairie shoestring. The native peoples use that for a lot of medicinal purposes, but you don't see it a lot because it's not very tolerant of herbicides, but we haven't used any herbicides in 23 years now. So we find it in our pastures, and that's, like I said, one of my favorites. Next. So that's an example of sweet clover. A lot of farmers seem to cuss the sweet clover, but I think it's mainly because they don't know how to manage it. It's a tremendous asset for us. It adds fertility. It's really beneficial for wildlife and insects. It's nutritious for livestock. It's deeper rooted. So that photo on the left shows the minimum maintenance road. My place is on the right side, and you can see there's quite a contrast there. And the neighbor on the left, she asked, this was about the time this picture was taken a few years back, she says, I want to know what you're spraying on your pastures to make them look so good. Well, I had to break the news to her. I said, it's not about what I'm spraying. It's about what I'm not spraying on my pastures. Like most people around, routinely spray their pastures to control noxious weeds, leafy spurge mostly, and musk thistles and those kind of things. So anyway, when we stopped using those chemicals, we saw just a tremendous improvement in diversity and soil health and a lot of other benefits. Next. There's some examples of legumes that we've introduced into native pastures. And if you see those streaks through the field, we would feed hay to cattle in the wintertime, mature alfalfa hay that had a lot of seed in it. So those cattle would stomp that into the ground, and where they were eating, we'd roll the bales down the hill, and boy, it really improved. Gave us a lot of more, mostly alfalfa in the some clover in the pastures, and university research shows that if you can have 30% legumes in your pasture, that's the equivalent of adding 200 pounds of commercial nitrogen in split applications across the grazing season. I don't buy fertilizer, so I don't know what it costs to buy 200 pounds of commercial nitrogen, but I know it would be a lot in today's market. So if we can do that using techniques like this, I mean, that's just, tremendous benefit to us. That lower bottom center photo, that's up on what my kids used to call Thistle Hill. There used to be just covered with thistles, and we've pretty much eliminated. There are hardly any thistles in that pasture at all anymore, and we've done it all with using natural methods, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Oh, and that upper mid picture, that's some more of that lead plant, that favorite plant of mine. So next, just some more photos of some of my crops and buffer strips, more milkweed. And I think you'll notice that, the ground that I farm is all pretty flat in the central. It's in the Clear Creek Valley, which is not very wide. It's probably only about a valley. It's only about a half mile wide. But I farm flat ground, and I got some really, really rugged hilly ground. But I don't try to farm it. A lot of people have torn that up and around in the area and farm incredibly steep hills and stuff. I don't believe in doing that. And that's part of my conservation strategy, is there's just some things that shouldn't be farmed. And for a lot of good reasons, which we'll show a little bit about later. So next. Just some examples of native grass. We did some pretty high stock density. That's native virgin prairie. We did some pretty high stock densities, stimulated the ground, and we got some good rains that summer. And man, that stuff just came on like I'd never seen grass like that on my place or anybody else's place around. So you can see the 8-foot tall blue stem and Indian grass there. Next. And then you can just see how thick some of that stuff is, the blue stem. And there was a lot of switchgrass in there, even some little blue stem, which is our state grass. And my kids have taken a big part of my operation and continue to do that. So that upper right is an example of a buffalo wallow, and that different colored grass that's kind of a low spot. It's kind of a swampy area, but that's where the buffalo wallowed, a long time ago, and today it's kind of just a low spot where water kind of stands most of the time. Next, there's some examples of a ground that we farmed that back when I was in high school, and then when I left and went to college, Dad put that into CRP, and there was 2 CRP contracts on that, so it was in for quite a long time. Native grass. There's quite a bit of clover in there too, and so we do what I call rotational haying on that. We hay it sometimes. We graze it. It just depends on the year and what our needs are. And the pictures with the snow is to set an example of trying to capture as much moisture as we can. A lot of the neighbors, their fields are blown clear, and we try to leave some growth so we can catch snow this time of year. And you got two free resources in this business, and sunshine and moisture. And so we try to keep the ground covered, and especially during the growing season, and so we can capture as much sunlight as we possibly can. And it's not about how much rain you get or how much moisture you get. It's how much you keep on your land that matters. So that's, important. Next. Okay. So not everybody has the same approach as I do. These are some of my neighbors, and you can see some of the erosion, and there's some really, really hilly pivots farmed around here. And that one on the lower right is a pivot, but it doesn't really do it justice. That's not even near as hilly as some of them, but there's a ditch running down through that. A lot of times those ditches are 2 or 3 feet deep, and they fill them in every spring and start over. And that upper right, that's just right across the road from where I live. And, the rain washed all that trash off of the field and covered up the fences and the road ditch there. So, and we try to make sure that we never have a situation like that. So, I mean, I hear a lot of times, farmers are the best environmentalists there are. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think some are, but there's a lot of them that aren't, and some of them, are far from it. And I could take you within a couple miles of my place and show you lots and lots of examples of that. So, it's anyway. Next, and it's just another example. These are neighbors. That photo on the left, there's a guy that farms a lot of ground around me, and he farms right up to the gravel on the roadway, and on the minimum maintenance roads, he farms right up into the roadway. And my farm, there's on the right-hand side. I've got about a 40 or 50-foot buffer strip before my crop ground starts. And so I take a little bit different approach. And the photo there on the right, that's that cornfield is no-tilled, and there's nothing wrong with no-till. I try to do no-till as much as I can. I think it's but everything has a limit. And so they had a lot of runoff, and that's the road ditch. And it got to a place where you couldn't even get down the road because it eventually washed across the road in the lowest spot. And, so I see those kind of atrocities all around me. Some of these same neighbors have cut every single tree down along the creek bank, and then they farm till their planters hanging over the edge of the creek bank, and the chemicals are running right into the live stream. And I have wide buffer strips around, all those areas, and lots of trees. And so I just take a little bit different viewpoint. Next. So one thing I have to, I think more farmers should be aware of this, and I take my accountability very serious, because I know that my farm is connected to the Gulf of Mexico. Clear Creek runs through here, which empties into the Muddy Creek, which into the Loup River system, into the Platte, the Missouri, the Mississippi, and the Gulf of Mexico. So what I do on my farm can have a far-reaching impact. So I take land management very seriously. And I constantly ask myself, am I part of the problem or am I part of the solution? Because my decisions determine that. Next. A little bit about the history. There's my daughter standing in an old wagon trail, which is still very prominent. And the lower right there, that's an old sod dugout site on my farm. And there's an old iron bed frame that you can see in the upper right picture there. So we have a lot of historical sites. The bottom left there, that's an old timber claim after the Homestead Act in 1862. In 1872, the Timber Culture Act came along, and if you planted 10 acres of trees, well, it started out 40 acres, and they reduced it to 10 acres because they realized 40 was too many to really make it. It wasn't really feasible. You could get another quarter section if you planted 10 acres of trees. And then that plat map is an 1884 plat map. And you can see that prominent wagon trail going right through the middle of my farm. I'm in section 21 there. In the middle and the upper, that's an old gravel pit. So the early settlers around here got gravel out of there to make cement. And a lot of even buildings that are over 100 years old around here have cement foundations and cement floors. And because they had gravel out of that gravel pit. So anyway, that's some of the history here. And of course, before the settlers came along, things really changed when the settlers came in here. Before that, the native people, which they were abundant in this area, and there's native campsites around, they were managing the land in harmony with Mother Nature. And then, the white settlers came in, and that kind of changed. Next. So these are photos all from the same area, with just different angles. And one was in the wintertime. You can see it a little bit better, but you can see the old plow lines. So that and this just up the hill from where that sod dugout site is, that homesteader plowed up that hillside so he could raise some grain crops to feed his livestock and try to, hunker down in his sod dugout and make, so he could get title of the land. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, even 120 years later, you can still see the impact of what the plow did to the prairie. it never returns quite to the way it was because it was evolved over millions of years, and you don't just fix that in if even 100 years. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm making decisions out here, that what the far-reaching implications could possibly be. Next. So my alma mater was, and I got my bachelor's degree out of Kansas State University, the first land grant institution in the U.S. And right on their university seal, it says, "Rule by obeying nature's laws." They knew that in 1863. What happened? Because we've moved so far away from that premise in our farming methods that it's embarrassing. And I'm going to tell you that regenerative organic farming takes us back to that, to a place where we actually rule by obeying nature's laws and work with Mother Nature. Next. I think, as a land manager, the first thing you need to do is learn how to ask all the right questions. Because we make a lot of decisions in a lot of different areas. Our business is multifaceted here, and so as land managers and conservationists, we need to ask questions that'll steer us towards the facts and away from the propaganda. Next. Versus, looking for answers like a lot of people do that maybe just conveniently fit your personal preferences. We need to be objective. And again, do you want to be part of the problem, or you want to be part of the solution? And I look in the mirror sometimes and say, is this the legacy that I want to leave? And that's something we should all be thinking about. Next. So I'm pretty much an outlier out here. I'm the only organic farmer in my county. I'm the only person that's done grass-fed beef in this area on a larger scale. So I don't drive those big green tractors like everybody else. I don't calve in January, February, and March. And I just tell people, it's the road less traveled, and it can be lonely at the top. That's the County Road 465. I call that the 465 Expressway. And traffic isn't always that heavy. I took that photo during peak rush hour. So anyway, next. So I've kind of developed this attitude where, it's not me that's the weird one out here doing all this stuff that nobody else is doing. It's the rest of the herd that's gone insane. And that attitude allows me to cope with, being an outlier. And I'm sure some people must think I'm crazy, but like that Waylon Jennings song, I've always been crazy, but it's kept me from going insane. That's kind of how I view it. So next. So a lot of us, and some of my friends, I'm good friends with people like Greg Judy and Gabe Brown and Will Harris and those guys. And I've visited a lot of those guys and been to their operations. They've been to my place. And I noticed something similar. They all dare to be different. They all have a different mindset. They've developed this moxie and they have a different way of the way they look at land and land management. And I say it takes a lot of R&R, and I don't mean rest and relaxation, but resiliency and resourcefulness to make this work. And I'm going to tell you that all my experience as a coach and an athlete were extremely beneficial to me. It allowed me to do the things on the farm. People think, well, that's two completely separate different things, but there's a lot of congruency there. It allowed me to set goals and focus on things and push beyond the limits of others. And anyway, to look at my farm as an ecosystem and not just a chunk of land. Next. I really like some of these quotes, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but Aldo Leopold was a great scientist, ecologist, conservationist of the 20th century. And these quotes, I think, embody the mindset that we should have as land managers. Regenerative organic farming strives to find that harmony. And I no longer look at plants and animals as being good or bad. There's some that I like better than others, and there's no doubt about that. But I realize they all have a purpose in nature because they developed over millions of years. Sometimes they're problematic with some of my plants, but and this helps me with my holistic process to think about how am I going to deal with those things. Anyway, we need to view our land as a highly complex functioning ecosystem, where all these living organisms are intricately connected. And that's kind of what Leopold mentions here, and I think, a conventional farmer's mindset, well, at least a lot of people, they wake up every day and decide, what am I going to kill today with a herbicide or insecticide or a fungicide, or a trap or a firearm. And if you got a regenerative organic mindset, you think every day about how can I work more with Mother Nature? How can I create biomimicry and promote an ecosystem that thrives? Next. So here's just one example of how I manage some invasive plants. Musk thistles, over the years has been our number one invasive species here. And it's not a problem for us at all. I mean, some of my neighbors have tons of thistles in their field and they're spraying, and we don't ever spray. And you'd be hard pressed to drive by my place and see a musk thistle out in the pasture. Now, we can find them. There's some out there. We've used mechanical, chop it dig them out with a spade, and I've used biological control. We have a lot of the insects that eat the seeds, and then high stock density grazing just obliterates musk thistles, just the trampling effect, and they even eat the leaves and the heads and stuff. So that's worked really well for us. Next. Probably one of my favorite quote is when someone tells you can't do something, that's a reflection on their limitations and not yours. And that's been my something that's helped me through life from a very young age. They told me I couldn't grow good crops without chemicals and fertilizers, and I'll let all of you be the judge of that from the photos. Told me I couldn't produce high quality beef on just finished on grass alone, and I finished several thousand head of cattle on grass, and a lot of them went into high end restaurants, and a lot of them graded choice, and some of them even graded prime. They told me that as a competitive athlete, that I could never win at a high level without using anabolic steroids, performance enhancing drugs. And I competed in 130 competitions and over a 27-year span, never used anything. And I won over half those competitions, and I competed at state, national, international levels. So I want to talk just a little bit, one more minute about that. I couldn't have accomplished what I have in farming if it weren't for the lessons I learned in the 27 years of competitive weightlifting and working as a strength and conditioning coach. And, I worked around a lot of elite athletes. I coached several Olympians, national champions, professional athletes. I was around Hall of Fame coaches, and I competed along some of the strongest men in the world. For 4 years at the University of Massachusetts, I had an office right across the hallway from the now Hall of Fame basketball coach, John Calipari. And we became friends, and I worked with him on a regular basis and his players. And you don't hang around people like that without developing a very unique mindset. But for me, the defining moment was when I was really at a crossroads in my farming operation. I thought, I either got to make some changes or I'm going to get out of farming altogether. And I was hesitant, what am I going to do? Can I move towards regenerative farming? And in 2001, I went to Scotland to compete in the World All-Around Weightlifting Championships. And I went over there, and I was going to do the competition, and I was going to try to lift the legendary Denny stones, the most famous lifting stones in the world. And people said, well, you don't have a chance of lifting those. Only a dozen men in history had ever lifted them. I was 41 years old. And they said, you're a fat old farmer lifting in a 100-year-old barn. And you really think, some of the strongest men in the world have failed to lift them. Why would you think you'd have a chance? Well, really, that was a reflection on their limitations and not mine. They didn't know, my capabilities and my determination. Anyway, I went over there. I won the competition. It was a grueling two-day event. I won the Best Lifter Award in the Masters Division. And the very next day, and I was really beat. But the very next day, we went up in the Highlands, and I became the second American in history and the 14th strongman in history to lift the Denny stones. And the point of all this is that when I came home, I knew that I could do anything. I felt like Superman. I started, within a few months, I started my transition to regenerative farming, and it's allowed me to do a lot of the things that you're seeing here in my presentation over the years. So there's a lot of relevancy to that story. And I also will say, make the, kind of the joke, I'm still the only person in history that ever lifted the Denny Stones wearing I always wearing a pair of Carhartts and a seed corn hat and a pair of work boots. I didn't have a lifting belt. I didn't have, straps and wraps and chalk and tacky. And it's a lot of the stuff that other people were using. I just went out there in my work clothes and lifted them. So I think that was somewhat remarkable. And like I said, I was 41 years old at the time. So ignore the naysayers if you're trying to make decisions and move to another, to alternatives. Next. So just quickly, some of the, things started a long time ago. My dad came to this area in the 1950s, and he started right away putting highly erodible land back into perennial pasture. And then we started doing some crop rotations, started doing the AMP grazing on 1,700 acres in the 1970s. Nobody was doing that then. We were doing bale grazing in the winter in the 1970s. Nobody was doing that. Cover cropping. We did more of it in the 1980s, but the really significant change was in 2002, and I've already talked about that, how I transitioned my entire farming operation on all 2,800 acres and stopped using the chemicals and fertilizers. And I had multiple CSP and EQIP contracts that helped me, at least partly, in moving in that direction. And then I started using multi-species livestock. And in 2017, we went back to using some organic cash grain crops and more extensive cover cropping. Next. So at the pinnacle, I was running 1,500 to 1,800 head cattle on grass, 500 head of sheep and goats, 400 laying hens. I had 40 miles of fences, 90 watering sites, and 22 water wells. And there's a picture of our mobile chicken trailer held about those 400 laying hens, and my kids, they were in charge of gathering the eggs. And I had a couple Amish interns that came from Pennsylvania, and they built that for me, and it's a Cadillac. And I told them, I said, you guys can build a barn in a day. I mean, a chicken house shouldn't take more than maybe 30 minutes to an hour. But they laughed and said, well, if we had enough help, we could probably do it that fast. But anyway, they did a remarkable job using recycled materials off of the farm. But anyway, since then I've downsized and I've scaled back, and, I'm retirement age or past, and, I want to do it at that scale anymore. But I'm out here working full time. But anyway, that was at the peak there. Next. I think the main question you need to ask yourself: you're getting financially rewarded for these regenerative practice. I mean, that profitability is still my main focus. And the banker wants money. They don't want bushels. They don't care about your pounds or your soil health. I mean, they just say that's great, but now we want our money. So without making consistent profits, you're not going to be able to keep this up, and you're going to have to change. And but good thing is that with proper management, regenerative farming is actually congruent with higher profits. I mean, I make more money on 800 acres now than I did on all 2,800, in the beginning. And also, if we want other people to convert to these practices, we need to show them the money. They have to have a financial incentive, because these are businesses. And if you're like me, and I know I am, my only source of income is what I make from the land. As a farmer and a rancher, I don't have any other sources of income. So if this doesn't work for me, I'd probably end up living in a van down by the river eating government cheese. And I have to admit, there are days when that maybe seems like it might be a better option. But for the most part, I mean, I like what I'm doing, and I like to keep doing it for a while, and then pass that on to my children. Next. I spend a lot of time. I give entire lectures on profitability and making dollars and cents with regenerative farming. But anyway, the key for us, in a nutshell, is being able to reduce and eliminate some of the inputs, and then add value on the marketing end. And the best way that I found to do that for us in our situation was, with the organic certification, and be able to sell products at 1.5 to 3 times the price, and getting rid of a lot of the inputs. That works pretty well. And also, diversity is key. I think a lot of the people I know that are in regenerative farming or in organic, they have more than 1 or 2 income streams. They have multiple 3, 4, 5 different income streams, and they're able to adapt to the various different changes. So, back when I was finishing grass-fed cattle, I mean, the cattle weren't organic at that time, and but I was getting double the price for grass fat cattle as commodity fat cattle. That worked pretty well. And then they repealed country of origin labeling back in 2015, and those premiums diminished. And the point about that is that farm policy does matter. And that's why I've been involved as in advocacy work for the last 20 years, working with various different organizations. And we finally got that country of origin labeling thing changed, and you can't no longer label stuff as product of the U.S. when it's coming in from multiple other countries. I'm also on the National Governing Council for the Organic Farmers Association. So anyway, the organic crops have worked best for us. I'm not here to convince anybody that they should be an organic farmer. That's a personal decision. But at the same time, that concept of reducing inputs or eliminating and adding value works really well to increase profitability. So that's the take-home message there. Next. For the greatest return I've seen on an investment in our operation, I already talked about this, the organic certification. It's given us a lot of premiums on a yearly basis, and that's worked really well for us. So okay, go to the next then. And I'm also certified with I just want to mention I'm certified with the Real Organic Project, and that's an add-on certification which takes it to a higher level. Basically, in a nutshell, that means that I'm not producing anything with using hydroponic methods, and I don't have a CAFO on my farm. So I've never owned a feed bunk. I've never owned a feed truck. My cattle have never gotten lick tubs. They survive on grass and mineral and some supplement with some hay, and that's it. So anyway, so that stuff is pretty congruent with my values. Next. Just some more photos of my crops. That photo on the left is a cornfield that's got rows that are a mile long. So I'm out there cultivating. I mean, it takes a long time to go from one end to the other and back, like 30 or 40 minutes sometimes when the corn is small. So that's the roughest field I have right there. You can see there's just a little bit of roll to it. And then the uphill side is all grass. And there's some prairie strips out there, too, that we use, which are beneficial. And then just the soybean field there on the right. Next. The other thing that's been the second thing that's been a great return on our investment is our fencing and water system, the infrastructure. And that allows us to do the grazing. And that's what makes this operation tick, because every acre gets grazed. Maybe not every year, but every acre on my farm gets grazed. Even the yard, even my front yard, because I don't like running a lawnmower. But typically our stocking rate is double that of my conventional neighbors. So just on my 800 acres, I have 50 permanent watering sites, year-round watering sites, 15 miles of fences, and there's 10 wells out here, 5 for irrigation and 5 for livestock and domestic use. I've got 2 houses on the farm. But anyway, I've used EQIP and CSP funding to help me transition to some of this. That photo on the right shows some really high stock density, 1 million pounds of beef per acre, which we don't do on a regular basis. That was more of an experimental kind of thing there. But anyway, spending a few $1,000s on fencing and water system certainly makes a lot more sense and being able to double your herd size is a lot better than going out and buying a second ranch of the same size at today's prices. So anyway, that's kind of one of the things we're doing there. Next. Here's a project that was done through EQIP, and this is about a $30,000, and it's on a 300-acre native grass. And you can see where in the upper left there, we're suppressing that early season brome and taking it down pretty hard, and then the warm seasons will start to come through and really take hold. But anyway, the payback on that was only about 2 years because the cost share helped a lot and allowed us to increase our stocking rate by 50% right in the first year or two and extend our grazing season. So I know I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a minute. I know some people out there are allergic to the USDA, and they even start foaming at the mouth if you even suggest that they might use these programs, and they condemn those who do. Well, ignore the haters. These programs are voluntary, so it's pretty simple. If you don't like them, don't participate. But the reality is, farmers like myself, I have to compete against farmers that are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in crop subsidies. When it comes to going out and renting land or buying land, I have to compete against those people. So I don't feel, any shame in using these programs. And these programs aren't perpetual money. They help you do a thing, a certain project that helps you with your conservation goals. So the only advice I would give is, don't chase the money. Don't let the tail start wagging the dog. Use the government programs to help you reach the goals that you already have, and kind of on your terms. And we've been able to do that successfully with CRP, CSP, and EQIP programs. So, and one last point, in my opinion, we'd be much better off if all USDA funding for farmers and ranchers went for conservation practices and actual food production and specialty crops, instead of for commodity feed grain subsidies that have led to widespread land degradation and environmental contamination. Next. Just another example of EQIP that helped us develop a quarter section of ground over the years. And next. And these also help. We calve out on grass in May and June, and so this grazing system allows us to do that. We keep animals moving across the landscape, which makes them a lot healthier. I rarely ever have to treat any livestock. Next. Just some more examples of summer calving, and like I said, they don't ever get any supplements of any kind except some hay in the wintertime when the weather gets pretty bad. We graze year round, and I gave a recent presentation on building a forage chain for year-round grazing in the Midwest. So my unfair advantage is irrigation. About half of my land base is certified irrigated acres. I sit over the deepest part of the Ogallala Aquifer, and I have 5 wells that are used for irrigation, various different systems. That one in the upper left is a lateral move. It's the only one in the county. It goes a mile back and forth. You can see there's 2 end guns on it. So it drags a big hose and a cord, and just goes straight across the field for a mile. Next. Just more examples of no-till cover crops and aerial seed cover crops into standing corn sometimes. Sometimes I'll seed right into where the cattle are at, let them, nub it down, and then take them off right before the plants emerge. Anyway, so just doing a lot with cover crops. Next, more no-till cover cropping that we've done. Oh, go ahead next, Angela. Yeah, there's more. I guess I was maybe ahead of the game here. Okay, next. There's something most people wouldn't do. Graze a pure stand of alfalfa, but hay prices were low that year. I had 300 head of yearlings that I was custom grazing for some people, and it wasn't going to make sense to hay all this. So I let the alfalfa get fairly mature, and people said, that's something, you can't do that. It won't work. You're going to kill them. And I didn't use any bullet blocks or anything like that, but I grazed 115 acre field of alfalfa, moving that fence 3 or 4 times a day, strip grazing, and I never lost any. Of course, it takes some management. I'm not saying it's not risky. Don't get me wrong. There's risks, but with proper management, we made that work, and we made a lot more money than we would have hated. And we were, harvesting that and then fertilizing it at the same time. Next. Yeah. Regenerative organic has become the gold standard for food production. And, and my organic system plan is a 17-page document that is dominated with regenerative practices. And those are requirements. They're not options. I think, the regenerative organic farming and food production really resonates with majority consumers. Most of the haters that I've encountered have been other farmers who claim that, what I'm doing is not any better than conventional farming, and they portray it as being inferior. But their voice is weak and limited to a very small minority. And so, but anyway, I'm not saying the way I farm is better. It's just different in a much better way. Next. just want to look at, at the economics of the big picture. The regenerative farming, brings our future, helps attract future generations. We need more farmers on the land, and it helps do that. It creates more jobs because it does require more labor. And that's always, people have used that for criticism. It's like, well, aren't we always trying to create more jobs in rural America? Now, I know the challenge is finding people to fill those jobs, but at the same time, if we create more jobs and get more people out here, that revitalizes rural communities. I mean, what's not to like about that? So it's not a valid criticism that we're creating more jobs because we need more labor. I'd rather pay people than pay the Monsatans of the world, because if I pay employees, that money stays in the community and trickles down. Next. I got a couple more slides here. And one of the important things for me is connecting. And I've hosted people on my farm from every continent except Antarctica, places like Argentina, South Korea, China, Scotland, England, Australia, Africa, outer Mongolia, Canada, Paraguay. I've had some large tour groups. We've had, I don't know how many documentary crews out here and news crews and journalists doing stories. And I think it's important, at least for me, it is to share my story and take what I do beyond the borders of my farm so I can have a greater impact. We've hosted students, advocacy groups, farm organizations, political leaders, regenerative ag leaders, and so forth. So anyway, next, just a sunset from my farm. One more slide and that's it. Go ahead. That's just a sunrise coming over my farm. So that's all I have.